What's good, YouTube? It's me, Squiddy, back in another Squid video. With that dropping in about 9 days time, I wanted to talk to you guys about a very cool card that's actually being released, and that's Baphomet, the Phantom Dark Beast Ruler. This is a support for the existing Chimera archetype that we just got in the recent set, and already the deck was pretty competitive, right? Like, players were mishmashing it with the existing fusion support like Branded, and it just turns out that this card actually ties everything together because what it does is just so cool. It opens up a lot of new options and playstyles for the deck. For those of you guys that haven't read this card, this is a level 6 Fiend 2400 attack fusion monster that says it requires 2 Beast, Fiend, and or Illusion monsters with different types, meaning we now have the last piece that was missing from the initial Chimera support, because previously when we didn't have access to a Fiend and a Beast, it was very hard to play, right? Like, those are the requirements that you actually needed to make the new existing Chimera, the Flying Mythical Beast, with. However, you could never really play if you had something like a Gazelle or like 2 Illusions in your hand, like a Sword Knight and a Koado. You would have to hinge on making either a Magnum the Reliever or a Guardian Chimera, and both of those cards kind of required you already having a monster on the table, right? Like Guardian Chimera, you need a monster on the table, and then Magnum, you also need an extra deck monster on the table, whereas this new Baphomet, you can straight up just fuse 2 illusions with different names, or a Beast and an illusion, or a Fiend and an illusion. So it allows you to have a lot more wiggle room to play and to start off your combos. Not only that, but this card actually has an amazing effect. First and foremost, it becomes Chimera the Flying Mythical Beast while in the field or in the graveyard. Obviously, we need that clause for our Koados and our Sword Knights to be live in the graveyard. And then the other effect is even more stunning, because if this card is fusion summoned, you can actually send 1 Beast, Fiend, or Illusion monster from your deck to your graveyard, meaning you're able to instantly Foolish Burial any Beast, Fiend, or Illusion type. That's right, there's actually no restriction this time. There's no level 5, level 4 Beast or Fiend that you have to search. You can search anything, any level. There's no restriction, which is crazy. If you think about it historically in Yu-Gi-Oh!, anything that has a Foolish Burial like effect has always been pretty broken in the game, and when you can do it directly from your deck very easily, this is probably going to open up a can of worms that we're going to be exploring, which is why. Following through with the effect, he says, during your opponent's turn, quick effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard, and then target one of your banished Beast, Fiend, or Illusion monsters, except this card, special summon it. So it has an additional effect that works very well with the existing Chimera, given that Chimera actually banishes himself to summon back a monster from your graveyard, right? So now that you can banish Chimera, the King of Phantom Beasts, to summon something out, Chimera becomes banished, and when we have Baphomet in graveyard, we can then use the Baphomet to banish itself to summon back either the Chimera or an existing Beast, Fiend, or Illusion that's already banished, thereby causing a nearly endless loop. By bringing back Chimera, Chimera can banish itself to bring back something else, and you get like a little feedback loop, which is really cool that it has that interaction. And I want to make this video specifically to talk about what we can actually dump with this card, because there are a lot of cool options. So without further ado, I'll show you guys the combo generically, what you would do with the Sword Knight, so you guys have a better understanding of how it works. So, this is a standard play with the Cornfield Koado, nothing special. We're just going to go ahead and add the Sword Knight off of 1 Sword Knight. It also doesn't matter if you start with Sword Knight instead of Koado. Add Gazelle and add Chimera Fusion. Activate Chimera Fusion, standard combos here. We're going to go ahead and go into our Chimera the King Phantom Beast. Again, I love just placing these in defense mode just because you can actually get OTK'd by purely happiness. Just small things to note. Gonna add a copy of either Koado, and then summon back the Mirror Sword Knight. It's probably safer to do it this way. You could technically alternate between, it doesn't really matter, as long as they're different names. We're going to add back Chimera Fusion. Now, standard combo, previously, before the existence of Yugioh, we would set the Chimera Fusion and then hedge on making Guardian Chimera to disrupt our opponent during their turn. But instead, you can actually activate the Chimera Fusion now that you added it back, using the Chimera, the King of Phantom Beasts, as well as the Cornfield Koado in the hand to go into the Baphomet, the Phantom Beast Dark Ruler. And now from here, we can trigger the effect of Phantom Beast Dark Ruler to Foolish any Fiend, Illusion, or Beast. Now, this does turn off the Guardian Chimera line, so you have to juggle whether or not Guardian Chimera is more impactful in the matchup. If you're playing against a trap matchup, it might just be better to hold the Chimera Fusion, set it, and then have access to the Guardian Chimera during their turn. However, against decks like Tearlaments or against decks that rely on Graveyard, you can actually Foolish something like End of ANUBIS, which just shuts them down completely, because on their turn, we can actually banish the Chimera, the King of Phantom Beasts, to resurrect the Fiend that we Foolished from our deck, thereby creating a floodgate. And we also have that follow-up with the Mirror Sword Knight on their turn. We're discarding a card during the end phase as well, and we have Berfomet, Phantom Beast, Dark Ruler to think about. So yeah, this is a standard line combo I want to show you guys, and now let's talk about some of the targets that are very, very good in this combo. With that combo explanation out of the way, let's talk a little bit about some of the cooler targets that you can actually foolish off of Berfomet. And the first one is obviously End of ANUBIS. This one comes to mind because of the fact that he's a walking Necrovalley that says, while this card is face up on the field, all effects of spell, trap, and monster effects that target a card in the graveyard or that activate in the graveyard are negated. So it's really, really clutch. It negates basically every effect in a tier limits deck that they're milling. However, it does kind of fall flat when you do think about the existence of Bystials. Unlike Necrovalley, this card actually does not prevent banishing cards from the graveyard, so that could be a little bit of a double-edged sword. Obviously, that works for our deck because we can banish to resurrect things from the graveyard using Chimera or Berfomet, but against tier limits, if they're playing Bystials, they can just bring a Bystial out, and then that 2500 will actually crash with the End of ANUBIS, so that's a little unfortunate. You will have to have something to protect it in the case of being destroyed by battle, but as a card on its own, I think standalone, being able to foolish it, bring it back, and effectively shut down the tier limits strategy completely, as well as being decent against a lot of other graveyard-based effects like Unchained. This card is a lot better than D-Shifter against Unchained because they actually negate the effect of the trap cards and the monster effects that pop and get the effects in the graveyard. So this does a lot against that matchup as well. So it has a lot of crossover against any real graveyard-based deck. Like even against Dragon Link, it might have a little bit of crossover as well, stopping baby dragons from searching in the graveyard, stopping Red Eyes, Darkness Metal Dragon, so on and so forth. So it does have a little bit of crossover against any graveyard-based deck. It's a lot like a Rise Heart almost, like the fact that you can basically negate the entire graveyard. Obviously, you don't have the banishing effect, so it's not quite as good, but being able to make it very easily in this deck by resolving one single Sword Knight or a Koado means that I think this is a really good inclusion for sure. Next, I would say a beast monster in the form of King Tiger WANGHU. This one we obviously already knew. It could be searchable previously off of the Berfomet anyways, the Big Wing Berfomet rather, but now you can just foolish it on top of being able to search it, so you can just bring it back. You're guaranteed to have this turn 1, and it's very effective against smaller decks like Pureleys. This triggers anytime they summon a Pureley and just pops it directly. Against Rescue Ace, it might have some crossover as well. You know, you're kind of popping the Rescue Ace Fire Hydrant, so there's something there. I mean, I'm not sure if it's really good enough to play, but it's just thinking about decks that will be popular in the upcoming format and how our cards can interact with it. I think it definitely has a little bit of crossover there. Against the sprites as well, obviously, it does have some leeway, you know, popping the sprite monsters that they're summoned out because they do have less than 400 attack. And there are also some other cool fiend targets. There's VERSAGO the Destroyer, we can't forget. This one is obviously a fusion substitute that is traditionally good because it's a fiend, so you can use it with Chimera Fusion when you do hard draw this, but being able to make Dragoon quite easily is really, really cool. And foolishing this can mean that it's really, really effective when they do Asher Branded Fusion. So if you're playing something like Branded in white, it makes it really, really easy for you to gain access to Dragoon, provided obviously you have Albaz access already. But it's just like cool that you can kind of dump a fusion substitute as well. So that's just really, really neat idea as well. And in addition to VERSAGO the Destroyer as a fusion substitute, there is actually a beast monster that's also a fusion substitute called Mythical Sheep #1. This is a really old card that was originally released in Tournament Pack 1, I believe, way back in the day. Now, this card is not quite as good. It's still a beast substitute that you can foolish off this, but the reason why VERSAGO is traditionally better is because he's a dark monster, meaning we can actually send him off of Branded Fusion to go into Lubellion, whereas with an Earth monster, we can't easily do that without going into like a worse monster, right? In fact, actually, I think you can't do it, period. So that's why Mystical Sheep #1 is not as good, but hey, he's still a beast, so this is something that we can definitely consider if there's like a niche deck that makes use of beasts, like for example the TRI-BRIGADE deck. Okay, the TRI-BRIGADE kit, obviously TRI-BRIGADEs revolve around being beasts, and you can actually foolish KITT as well to then foolish a copy of Nerval, use the effect to add a TRI-BRIGADE card to start your engines off on the TRI-BRIGADE side. Now, I know a lot of players were kind of experimenting with TRI-BRIGADE Chimera when it first came out. There is a restriction on the Big Wing Berfomet. Unfortunately, we are locked into fusion monsters when we use the effect to add 2 cards, but this is still something we can definitely explore. Having the option to now easily gain access to the TRI-BRIGADE engine means we don't have to play as many cards, and this could definitely be something that could be easily integrated in the deck, I think, for you guys to play around with. Now, moving on, there's actually some other funny cards as well. I saw a player playing this on Dueling Book. Protector of the Sanctuary. This says your opponent cannot draw cards except during the draw phases, but it combos very, very well with this trap card called Disturbance Strategy, which says your opponent shuffles their entire hand into their deck, then draws the same amount of cards. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you connect these two cards in tandem, you set a Disturbance Strategy, you Foolish the Protector of the Sanctuary, and then on your opponent's turn, you flip the Disturbance and chain Chimera to bring back Protector of the Sanctuary. Protector comes back on the field, and then Disturbance resolves. They shuffle back their entire hand, and then they are unable to draw cards, so they lose their entire hand effectively. This is a lot like the Drone Lockbird and the Trickstar Reincarnation loop that a lot of players were experimenting with way back in the day. So you can technically use Trickstar Reincarnation as an aside to the Disturbance Strategy as well if you want to go the toxic route, and then banish your opponent's entire hand, and then they're unable to draw. So these are just cool interactions you can play around with. Whether it's good or not, probably not, but hey, it's kind of annoying. If you want to annoy your opponent or troll the locals, it's something you can consider. And then, of course, one of my personal favorites is actually ARCHFIEND HEIRESS. This is a really, really cool card that says if this card is sent to the graveyard because of a card effect, you can search your deck for any ARCHFIEND card. And there just happens to be an ARCHFIEND trap card that's a pseudo D-barrier, which includes links. This card says this turn, neither player can special summon monsters with the same card types, Ritual, Fusion, XYZ, Synchro, or Link, as the types they already control, meaning it's almost like there can be only one for card types. So if your opponent controls an Unchained Lord of Yama and we flip this, they're not going to be able to link summon until they get rid of the Unchained Lord of Yama, and no, they cannot attempt to use that Unchained Lord of Yama to link off into any other monster. So it's a lot like there can be only one. It means they're going to have to get rid of that Yama somehow in order to keep playing. Against Purely, they cannot XYZ on top of their XYZ, so no Zeus. Against fusion decks as well, they're not going to be able to fusion summon, so on and so forth. You get the gist. But it's kind of cool that you can actually Foolish and ARCHFIEND HEIRESS very easily with the new Baphomet, and then search your deck for a pseudo D-barrier that works on link monsters. Really, really cool interaction there that you guys can explore around with. And then the last couple of cards I want to talk about. Okay, BYSER Shock. This was one that a lot of players were hyping up originally when the Chimeras first came out, because he's actually searchable off of the original Gazelle that says you can actually search a level 5 Fiend monster, which BYSER Shock happens to be. But now we have the alternative route to dump it with Baphomet, and what that means is we can bring it back during our opponent's end phase against a trap deck. If they're setting like a huge back row of 5 cards, we can banish Chimera, summon back the BYSER Shock in their end phase, effect, spin back all of their back row, Giant Trunade, we're going to win on the next turn. Just cool interaction there against trap decks. And there's also Invader of Darkness. If you guys hate quick play spell cards like I do, if you hate Sky Strikers and you hate Pureleys, you can actually bring in Invader of Darkness, Foolish Invader of Darkness, use the effect of Chimera, bring them back, and boom, no quick play spell cards. Obviously, they're going to be able to chain the quick play spell cards to the effect of Chimera in the graveyard, but hey, if we're stopping them from the rest of the turn from using quick play spell cards, it could have some merit, so you guys can definitely play around with this one. And then last but not least, we do have to talk about one more guy, and that's actually the Nightmare Magician, the original Nightmare that came out in the last set, and a lot of people disregarded this card because he's a level 7. He's a huge brick, right? But now we have the option of Foolishing him with the Baphomet or fusing him off to go into Baphomet because he's an illusion, right? Previously, we had no good targets to go into besides like a Guardian Chimera with him because illusions were not materials for any valid fusion monsters easily, right? So now we have Baphomet, so he's not as much of a brick, and he has an amazing effect where if he destroys a if an opponent's monster battles this card, you can actually take control of that opponent's monster at the end of the damage step, and then you can destroy a card on the field if another monster attacks. So he has like 2-for-1 effect that's really, really good at picking apart boards. This could be something that we can explore if it's a very grindy, heavy mid-range metagame. So those are some cards that I thought I'd share with you guys. I think this card is really, really cool. There are a lot of other cards, so if you guys have any other cards that we're missing, definitely let us know in the comments below. I would love to see what options are actually open with this card, because you can Foolish a Beast, Illusion, or a Fiend, and that just boggles my mind that he can do all of this at once. So yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below. Other than that, thanks for checking out this video. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.